She don't play for the Fever yet. She want to get down with the get down. She see what's going on. And
Right now, the Indiana Fever are the most economically powerful address in professional women's basketball. Not by a small margin, by a distance so enormous that it has fundamentally distorted the behavior of the entire free agent market, triggered a social media campaign unlike anything this league has ever seen, and placed the Fever's front office in one of the most psychologically complex roster-building situations in professional sports history. The gravitational pull of the Caitlin Clark economy is operating at a frequency that is attracting exactly two kinds of players. One kind will build a dynasty, the other kind will destroy one. And the terrifying part is that from the outside, they often look identical. This breakdown is going to do three things. It is going to explain why a very specific free agent profile is the most physically necessary acquisition the Indiana Fever can make.
I don't know what it is, Scrabble, I don't know what it is, but what she got on? She got on Indiana Fever merch. She don't play for the Fever yet. She want to get down with the get down. She see what's going on. And
It is going to explain why that same acquisition could become the most catastrophic mistake they ever make if they get the evaluation wrong. And it is going to explain why none of it matters at all if a looming labor crisis destroys the entire 2026 season before the first game is ever played. Stay with this until the end, because the final piece of this puzzle is the one that almost nobody is talking about, and it is the most important. In professional sports, there has always been a fundamental divide between the players who choose to orbit a generational superstar. This is not a new phenomenon. It has existed since the first dynasty was assembled, and it will persist long after the last one is dismantled. But the social media era, the explosion in women's basketball viewership, and the unique commercial phenomenon surrounding Caitlin Clark have made this divide more visible, more dramatic, and more consequential than at any previous point in this sport's history.
Here and robbing us, we don't need no more of that, okay? We damn sure don't need no more Natasha Howard's coming over here talking about winning MVP, trying to bring the ball up the court and not giving it to Caitlin Clark.
The first type is what every championship organization prays for. Call them the enforcer, the strategic veteran who recognizes a once-in-a-career opportunity and makes a conscious, intelligent decision to subordinate their individual ambitions completely in service of a larger mission. These are the players who study film until midnight, who understand offensive spatial geometry at a level most people can barely articulate, who set hard screens in the fourth quarter of playoff games when their legs are gone, and who walk into the facility every morning knowing with absolute clarity that their job is to protect the cornerstone, not to compete with her. These players are extraordinarily rare, and they are worth every single dollar of their contracts, plus the dollar that follows. The second type is far more common, and they are the reason general managers develop stress-related health problems. This is the clout chaser, the calculated opportunist who has looked at the television ratings, the sold-out arenas, the headline sponsorship deals, and the social media follower explosions surrounding a superstar and made a very cold, very deliberate decision to use that ecosystem as a personal brand launchpad.
Perspectives on the current state of the CBA negotiations. He thinks it's, unfortunate, as he said, where they are right now. He thinks they're getting close to the 11th hour. He has not yet set a drop-dead deadline date, and he said he's not ready.
They do not want the franchise. They want proximity to the franchise. They want the Caitlin Clark adjacency without the Caitlin Clark accountability. They want the cameras that follow her, the interview requests that orbit her, and the commercial conversations that happen because of her, while contributing absolutely nothing to the offensive system she carries. And right now, in the winter of 2026, the Indiana Fever are ground zero for this exact psychological battle playing out in real time. Something happened recently that made the entire sports world pause. A prominent defensive forward, 6 feet and 3 inches tall, who previously competed with the Golden State Valkyries organization, appeared on camera wearing Indiana Fever merchandise in public. Not in a training facility, not at a team event. In public, for content, for the algorithm. You might be tempted to read this as something innocent, a fan moment, a casual fashion choice from a player who admires the team. But let us be surgically precise about what is actually happening here. This is a calculated media move. This is a player who understands engagement cycles, who tracks viral content, and who is deliberately using team merchandise as an unofficial press release.
People out here are a little bit confused or have lost the plot that the NBA really does call a lot of the shots, and Adam Silver could have and should have been more prevalent and vocal of a role than he has been.
She is not sending a message to the Indiana Fever coaching staff through her agent. She is sending a message directly to the internet. She is manufacturing a narrative designed to place her name in the same sentence as the most commercially valuable player in women's basketball. And here is where it gets genuinely complicated. On a purely tactical basketball level, this is exactly the physical profile that the Indiana Fever desperately need to acquire. A 6'3" defensive forward, physically imposing, athletically versatile, capable of protecting the rim, switching on the perimeter, and setting the kind of brutal screens that open the court for an elite point guard. The scouting profile is real. The need is documented. The physical match exists. But basketball rosters are not assembled purely from scouting profiles. They are built on trust, on psychological alignment, and on the understanding that when you introduce a new personality into a carefully constructed locker room ecosystem, you are not simply adding a skill set. You are changing the entire atmospheric pressure of the building. The question is not whether this player can play. The question is the one that will determine whether this signing becomes a championship cornerstone or a $30 million mistake. Let us address the basketball reality with full honesty, because the Indiana Fever's defensive vulnerabilities are not narrative invention. They are statistically documented problems that directly contributed to the team's inability to advance in the postseason after everything they accomplished offensively. Caitlin Clark is one of the most offensively gifted players in the history of professional basketball. Her court vision, her shooting range from distances that should be statistically absurd, and her ability to orchestrate a high-paced offensive system are genuinely historic. But during her first professional season, she was physically targeted by veterans across the league in ways that were documented, discussed by analysts, and in several instances called out by former players as deliberate and excessive. She was hit. She was grabbed. She was undercut on shot attempts. She absorbed physical punishment throughout an entire season as a 22-year-old rookie, and the officiating response was inconsistent enough that opposing teams quickly understood the message. There are no immediate consequences for going after the point guard. The historical lesson that every competent front office should extract from that experience is devastatingly simple. You cannot build a dynasty around an offensive genius if you refuse to physically protect that offensive genius. Look at every championship dynasty in basketball history, and the pattern is identical without exception. Michael Jordan had Charles Oakley and then Dennis Rodman, two players whose primary professional function was to establish physical consequences for anyone who thought they could rough up number 23 and continue operating comfortably. Stephen Curry had Draymond Green, perhaps the most effective defensive communicator and physical enforcer the modern game has produced, a player who made opposing offenses recalibrate their entire approach simply by being present on the floor. LeBron James had a rotating cast of physical specialists throughout his career whose job was to ensure that certain boundaries were communicated clearly before the second quarter even began. Caitlin Clark needs a version of that player. She needs someone who wakes up every morning thinking about defensive positioning, hard foul thresholds, and how to make opposing guards uncomfortable before they get comfortable. She needs a 6'3" presence who can switch on the perimeter, bang in the post, set screens that create open lanes, and send a league-wide message that cheap shots on the Fever's franchise player come with a price. The physical and tactical case for signing a player matching this exact profile is completely airtight. The numbers support it. The playoff history supports it. The architecture of every basketball dynasty ever built supports it. But physical attributes are 10% of the evaluation. The other 90% is where championships are actually decided. Here is the question the Indiana Fever's front office needs to answer before they commit a single dollar to any free agent who has been publicly campaigning for a roster spot. Is this player coming to Indianapolis to win a championship? Or is this player coming to Indianapolis to win a sponsorship deal? These are not the same motivation. And in a league where the salary structure means that brand partnerships, social media visibility, and market exposure can generate more income than the actual contract itself, the financial incentive to chase the spotlight rather than protect it is real, documented, and significant. When a front office evaluates a free agent in a conventional market, they examine shooting percentages, defensive ratings, injury history, and character references from coaches. But the Indiana Fever are not operating in a conventional market. They are operating in the most scrutinized, most commercially valuable, most intensely covered environment in the history of women's professional basketball. Every player on that roster will be on national television on a regular basis. Every game will generate headlines. Every locker room dynamic will eventually be analyzed publicly. That level of exposure amplifies everything. It amplifies team chemistry when it functions correctly, and it amplifies locker room fractures with a speed and intensity that is unique to high-profile environments. A teammate who quietly resents a secondary role in a modest market becomes a destabilizing public force in the Caitlin Clark media environment. This is precisely why the psychological evaluation matters more than the scouting report. The Indiana Fever need to know, with absolute certainty, whether an incoming free agent views herself as a supporting character in a championship story or a co-star who is quietly planning to renegotiate her billing the moment the cameras arrive. The WNBA has already provided a costly, instructive, and entirely avoidable cautionary tale about what happens when that evaluation gets it wrong. The league has documented what happens when an experienced player enters a high-visibility team situation and almost immediately begins repositioning herself as the offensive focal point of a system that was never built around her. The pattern unfolds with depressing predictability. A veteran player, carrying her own statistical legacy and professional pride, arrives at a prominent organization and begins quietly pushing against the established offensive structure. She wants more touches. She wants to initiate the offense from the top. She wants the ball in her hands in late-game situations because she is convinced, genuinely and completely convinced, that her individual usage is compatible with the team's identity. But every possession she consumes is a possession that does not flow through the player the entire offensive architecture was designed to serve. What follows is not a single dramatic confrontation. It does not happen in one game or one moment. It happens the way that chemistry erodes under pressure. The spacing starts to break down. The transition game loses its pace. The fast, efficient offensive rhythm that took an entire offseason to install begins to stall in critical moments. The coaching staff finds itself managing personalities instead of installing game plans. And by the time the locker room fractures become public knowledge, the damage has already been sustained for weeks. The team loses games it should win. The franchise player absorbs more defensive attention because the offensive system no longer runs at full capacity. The media begins asking questions. The front office is left managing an expensive mistake wearing their uniform on national television. This is the specific disaster the Indiana Fever cannot afford to reproduce. Not primarily because of the basketball losses, though those matter, because of the financial stakes attached to this specific roster. The commercial ecosystem built around Caitlin Clark is worth hundreds of millions of dollars in television rights, sponsorship revenue, merchandise, and arena attendance. A single destabilizing personality in that locker room does not just cost wins, it threatens the entire business infrastructure. The Fever's evaluation process must be relentless. They need to speak to every coach, every teammate, and every general manager who has shared a locker room with any free agent under serious consideration. They need to ask one direct question and receive an honest answer. Does this player make everyone around her better, or does she make everything about herself? Fortunately, the Indiana Fever already have a living, breathing example of exactly what the right type of player looks like operating inside their specific ecosystem. Her name is Sophie Cunningham. Sophie Cunningham arrived in Indiana without the resume of a star player. She was not a primary option. She had a specific, clearly defined role: defend the perimeter, space the floor, shoot open threes when the defense rotates away, and physically protect her point guard whenever the situation required it. And she executed that role with complete, unambiguous professional commitment. She did not demand isolation possessions on nationally televised games. She did not lobby for increased usage when the cameras were pointed at the court. She set screens, cut hard off the ball, communicated defensively, and made plays within the offensive system rather than outside of it. And in doing so, she became one of the most genuinely beloved players among Fever supporters. More critically, she became exactly what Caitlin Clark needed beside her on the floor. Not a co-star competing for narrative space. A committed professional who understood that the most valuable contribution she could make to the franchise was making the star player's job easier, not more complicated. That is the blueprint. That is the psychological profile every incoming Fever player must match before they ever step into that facility. If a free agent arrives genuinely willing to be the next Sophie Cunningham, to embrace the screens, the hard fouls, the defensive assignments, and the open corner threes without once reaching for the microphone when the spotlight swings past her. Then the Indiana Fever should welcome that player with every available dollar in their budget. But the moment a free agent begins whispering about individual usage rates, the moment her conversations with her agent include anything about personal award aspirations, the moment she frames joining the Fever as a platform for herself rather than a commitment to the team, the front office must close that door permanently. You do not invite a competing gravity into the most powerful orbit in women's basketball, not at any price. And before we get into the part of this story that nobody wants to address directly, if this breakdown is giving you the kind of honest, detailed analysis you have been looking for, hit the like button right now and subscribe if you have not already. The comment section on this video is where the real conversation happens, and we genuinely want your take on everything coming in the next section, because it affects every single thing we have discussed so far. Here is where the analysis becomes genuinely alarming, because everything discussed up to this point, the free agent evaluations, the psychological screening, the championship architecture, all of it is completely irrelevant if the league does not have a season to play. While players are filming themselves in team merchandise and calculating entry into the Caitlin Clark commercial ecosystem, the foundational structure of the entire WNBA is under severe stress. The collective bargaining agreement that governed league operations has expired. The negotiations for a replacement deal have reached a level of tension that has put the 2026 season itself in genuine jeopardy. The core dispute is about money. Specifically, it is about how the explosive growth in WNBA revenue over the last 2 seasons gets divided between the ownership group that funds the franchises and the players who generate the product on the floor. The Players Association, represented by voices including Breanna Stewart and Nneka Ogwumike, has staked out an aggressive negotiating position. They want a percentage of gross revenue. That means their share is calculated before expenses are removed from the total. They want minimum salaries raised dramatically. They want guaranteed housing standards. They want infrastructure investment. And they want the salary cap to grow proportionally as the league's commercial footprint expands. The argument from the players sounds logical on its surface. The television ratings went dramatically upward. Ticket revenue spiked. Sponsorship interest multiplied. The product on the floor drove all of that value creation, and the athletes responsible deserve to share proportionally in the financial reward. But revenue and profit are not interchangeable concepts. And the WNBA, despite its remarkable cultural momentum, has not operated as a consistently profitable enterprise. The league has required significant financial support from the NBA infrastructure throughout its history. Many franchise owners are making long-term investment decisions in a league with genuine commercial potential that has not yet reliably converted that potential into sustainable margins. The Players Association is negotiating as though the ratings spike of the past season represents a permanent, established structural shift in the league's economics. The ownership group is negotiating as though it represents an encouraging but unproven trend that needs several more years of sustained investment before it justifies the level of revenue sharing being demanded. This is not simply a disagreement about percentages. It is a fundamentally incompatible interpretation of where the WNBA actually sits in its financial development. The players submitted a counterproposal in February 2026, reducing their ask to approximately 25% of gross revenue in the first year, scaling to an average of 27.5% over the life of the deal. The league has continued insisting that their offer, which delivers over 50% of net revenue after expenses, is more generous than the players are willing to acknowledge. These two sides are not close. They are operating on different mathematical foundations. Gross revenue before expenses and net revenue after expenses are not comparable figures, and both sides know it. At the NBA All-Star Weekend in February 2026, NBA Commissioner Adam Silver was asked directly about the state of the WNBA collective bargaining negotiations. And what he said, or more precisely, what he chose not to say, constitutes one of the most strategically significant public statements in the history of this league's labor relations. Silver acknowledged the negotiations were approaching what he described as the 11th hour. He acknowledged urgency. He acknowledged the stakes. And then, with complete unhurried composure, he stated he was not ready to set a drop-dead deadline. Analyze that response carefully. The most powerful executive in basketball, the man who oversees a multi-billion-dollar global enterprise and has navigated multiple rounds of NBA collective bargaining, labor disputes, international expansion, and franchise controversies, was handed the opportunity to intervene in a labor negotiation threatening the greatest commercial asset women's basketball has ever produced. and he chose patience over action, observation over intervention. This was not distraction. This was not ignorance of the stakes. Adam Silver does not operate on ignorance. He operates on calculation. He has managed deals of far greater financial complexity than this negotiation. He understands every single variable in the room. His silence is a message, and the message translates from corporate executive language into plain terms with uncomfortable clarity. The owners are not in a hurry. The ownership group has the financial resources to absorb the pressure of a delayed or shortened season far more comfortably than the players can absorb it. The average WNBA player earns a salary that requires many of them to compete internationally during the off-season simply to maintain financial stability. The gap between a WNBA contract and financial hardship is significantly smaller than the player's public negotiating posture suggests. Silver is sitting at the table with complete visibility into both hands. He knows the owner's financial position. He has a detailed working theory about the player's actual financial threshold, and he is doing what skilled negotiators do when they hold superior leverage. He is waiting. The WNBA draft is scheduled for April 13th. Training camps are expected around April 19th. That creates a window of roughly 8 weeks from the most recent reporting to finalize the offseason and start the season on schedule. Every day without a signed agreement is a day of compounding pressure, not equally distributed pressure. Pressure that lands harder on the side with less financial cushion. WNBPA President Nneka Agwemike expressed genuine surprise at Silver's comments, noting that